and taking us live.
Weave it together, coming up short and giving up never. Weave it together, come along, come along, come along, come along. Mending it together. A world on fire can't last forever. We're gonna mend it together. A stitch in time is gonna save nine. A stitch in time is gonna save nine. And I wanna be a catalyst for change, trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game, 'cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be. Dreaming together. Some say hope is a thing with feathers. We're gonna dream together. It sings a song, never stops at all. It sings a song, never stops at all. And I wanna be a catalyst for change, trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game, 'cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be.
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week, and it's a pleasure to see all of you. This week's session, Solutions from the Frontlines, as we come to a close to our final session, has had more than 6,000 plus participants from 108 countries, with a reach to over 7 million people via social media, speakers, 600 speakers, over 200 sessions, and 20 country launch events. This is fantastic. And it's because as we start, I would like to thank everybody who's been part of this and to make this happen. And I would really like to take this opportunity as we move to our closing session to thank our members who've made this made this possible, all the participants who've been there, the translators who have helped us fantastically through the week, and of course, the Catalyst team, which has worked twice the scenes. Thank you very much. But all of this is talk, and now we move into the most fantastic session of walking the talk. I've already mentioned we have live translation. Please click the button to make this happen. And to take us to our last session, I introduce Cheryl Dorsey, the CEO and spirit behind not just Echoing Green, but the whole sector. Cheryl, you're a friend and a mentor, and you've just taken this sector to another level. So over to you to close it and to take us forward for today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Daru, and thank you for those very kind words. And thanks to everyone who has joined us for this star-studded panel. I mean, this is what you call an embarrassment of riches. such an extraordinary group of leaders who are going to help us walk the talk and walk through this really important topic of how can key stakeholders support solutions from the front line. I'm going to share a couple of statistics, which I know are no surprise to any of you who have joined us. The fact that we know that current approaches to philanthropy aren't supporting proximate leaders is probably the reason that most of us have tuned in and joined this important conversation. So in the United States, my context, we know that communities of color receive just 8% of philanthropic dollars. For those of you who work in a global context, we know that less than 10% of America's, for example, annual foreign aid budget goes to local NGOs or companies or governments in emerging markets. It's interesting that this small number, despite estimates that if we shifted 25% of official development assistance from international to local intermediary structures, could deliver programming 32% more cost efficiently. So these numbers are eye-popping and disturbing, but also a call to action, which is why this august panel is gathered here today. And it's interesting, and I'm sure the amazing Catalyst 2030 team will drop this into the chat function, but Catalyst 2030 spends a lot of time thinking about these sectoral inequities and then trying to do something about it, because we are a community predicated on action. So if you have not seen an urgent invitation to shift funding practices, which was an open and co-written letter signed by more than 1,200 of us in the Catalyst 2030 network, really calling on funders to remodel their current practices by embracing 10 principles addressed in this letter to more effectively support grassroots organizations and sustainable social impact. It really is a powerful call to action. And I'm proud to say that the majority of folks that you're about to hear from our ecosystem partners are signatories to that letter, including Echoing Green. So let me very quickly introduce this tremendous group of leaders. I will give you their name and their title in alphabetical order, and then I'm going to ask them a series of questions that will, if nothing else, allow us to begin to contextualize this important conversation. So on this first part of the panel, we've got the following Catalyst 2030 ecosystem partners: Paola Fabiani, CEO of IDIS; Nala Faruqi, CEO, Arab Foundations Forum; Nathaniel Heller, Managing Director for Philanthropic Services, Geneva Global; Vishal Kapoor, Director, DASRA; and my dear friend Ndidi Uneli, founder of African Food Changemakers and board member, African Philanthropy Forum. Welcome to you all. Such an honor to be in conversation with you all. So first, let's get to know each of you. And if you could introduce yourselves by telling us how you came to this work and what you do in your current positions. So let me go in reverse order. And Ndidi, I'm going to start with you.
Hi, Cheryl. It's really an honor and privilege to be here. I'm a serial social entrepreneur and have been working in this space for over 25 years. And after starting a number of organizations in 2014, 2015, I wrote a book called Social Innovation in Africa, a practical guide for scaling impact, because I had started Leap Africa, NIA, and so many other organizations that were struggling to scale. So as I interviewed 80 entrepreneurs who had scaled in Africa and funders, I realized most of those who were scaling in Africa were not African organizations. They were Americans, Europeans who had come to Africa, or international organizations scaling. The African entrepreneurs who were doing amazing work at the grassroots could not access funding. And this really made me sad and propelled my work to help launch the African Philanthropy Forum in partnership with others who shared my passion, which is focused on saying, we have African philanthropists, let's galvanize them to give to African organizations, and let's also galvanize international partners to work hand in hand with them to do this. And we've worked extensively over the last 5 years, really proud of what Musu and the team have been able to do. And we're just starting the process, but we've started changing narratives about African nonprofits, African social enterprises, and proving that we have millions of strong local organizations driving change at the grassroots that deserve support. And that's what has propelled my work in the philanthropy landscape.
That's fabulous. Thanks, Ndidi. Vishal, I'll go to you next.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Hi.
It's lovely to be here, like you said, with this August panel. My name is Vishal and I work for Dasra. Dasra means enlightened giving in Sanskrit. And Cheryl, to your question of what brings us to this, at Dasra, over the last since 19 years, our work in India, cultivate strategic philanthropy within the country, domestically, as well as towards India from outside. We feel we've really experimented with a lot of these practices, right, that all of us together as a group want to change in philanthropy. We talk about unrestricted granting, investing in capacity building, cultivating transformational relationships, power, simplifying grant making, all of that good stuff. And we've had the opportunity to learn and experiment. We believe that now's the time to really come together, all of us, to practice these, shift the norm for giving. And so what brings us into this is basically we've practiced it, we believe it, we've seen the impact, and we're thrilled that there's so much global momentum now for these practices with all groups that are in the same way are aligned. And so that's what brings us second question about, sort of what we're doing right now, which can just mention a little bit. At my role at Dasra right now, I lead an initiative called the Rebuild India Fund. And this is a trust-based philanthropic platform that champions proximate leadership to support resilience amongst India's most vulnerable and marginalized communities. And over the next 5 years, Rebuild will provide 5 years of unrestricted funding, exposure, and capacity support to 500 proximate leaders in India. So very happy to be this group.
That's wonderful, Vishal. I hope you'll share some information about that very important initiative, and maybe we can put that in the chat. So thank you for that. Next, we'll hear from Nathaniel. Looking forward to your remarks, Nathaniel. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Thanks for pulling this all together. Really briefly, most of my life's been spent building and running mission-driven organizations, particularly those focused on anti-corruption, democratic governance, and broader international development agendas. And in this role at Geneva Global, I've been on the flip side of the coin of begging for money, actually trying to help very large foundations, private philanthropies, and ultra high net worth families and individuals give it away. So it's been a really interesting last several years for me, having spent decades, like many of you on this call and on this panel, constantly being anxious and stressed and frustrated by all of these issues and having all of these concerns and anxieties, and now being in a position at times to try and influence things in a better or at least less terrible direction. And I think if you talk to a lot of my colleagues, even though we're often behind the scenes from some of the working closely with some of the biggest donors in the world, it's a very imperfect journey. There's definitely some progress, and I think Catalyst 2030 and this ecosystem generally are really moving the needle, but it's still grinding imperfect progress. We are seeing more commitment to trust-based approaches, to unrestricted funding, to multi-year funding. And yet, that's not a battle we win every day, despite all of the pleading and the recommending and advising that we do and others like us do. So eager to kind of hear how others have solved for this. And, we can, I know, selfishly take some of those tips and tricks back to our donors and try and continue to move this needle a bit faster.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. Nyla, can we hear from you? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you so much for having me speak here today, because this is a very, very timely conversation. To Nathaniel's point, I'm in the middle of a fundraising cycle, so I'm all of those things, anxious and frustrated. But so I'm Naila Faroui. I'm the CEO of the Arab Foundations Forum, which is a network of Arab donors and foundations, as well as other philanthropy actors working across the Arab region. So not necessarily Arab, but working in the Arab region. And that covers the 22 countries of the Arab world, as they call it. So I've been at AFF now for about just under 10 years, having come from a whole other career, a whole other life, but having come from Sesame Street, long story, we can talk about that some other time. So not new to the NGO sector because Sesame Street is a nonprofit, but had a lot of experience, about 13 years of fundraising, and then come into this network where most of my members are in the practice of grant making. Although in the Arab region, our sector is a little bit unique in that we don't have as many foundations in the sense that are strictly grant makers. So in many cases, they tend to be hybrids, where we'll see that a lot of our members are grant seekers that also have the capacity to make grants. And what's interesting for me about this conversation is having the ability to maybe contextualize a little bit about what the restrictions are and some of the challenges that we're facing, which I know we'll get to a little bit later, but that's what brings me to this part of the conversation. So thank you.
Wonderful. And Paula, thank you so much for your patience, but really excited to hear from you as well.
Thank you, Cheryl, and it's really an honor to be here with such wonderful panelists. So my name is Paula. I lead IDIS. IDIS is a nonprofit promoting philanthropy in Brazil and Latin America. We provide consulting to families, companies, and civil society organizations, and we also produce knowledge. We run the most important giving research in the country, and do events. We have a partnership with the Global Philanthropy Forum, so we run the Brazilian Philanthropy Forum. And we also designed and developed impact projects. And one of them was actually in one of the panels of Catalyst Change Week, which is a fund to promote health in the most vulnerable areas of Brazil with the Brazilian Development Bank. And so I'm a colleague of Naila at the Wings board as well. We also have a partnership with the Charity Aid Foundation, which has representatives in all continents. I helped found the Brazilian chapter of Catalyst 2030. And also we've been trying to put together the movement 1% of Compromise 1%, which is a similar movement of Pledge 1% for companies to give 1% of their profits, and also the movement of a culture of giving. So in general, I've been working with philanthropy quite a lot in other organizations as well, not only that IDIS, and I see the barriers for funding to be more efficient, to be more effective. And I think that the letter summarizes really good practices that can really change the field and make funding more efficient. So I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And Paula, we'll start with you on this round. We'll go the other way now. And you alluded to this, some of the barriers and challenges that this letter that lists the 10 principles seeks to address. I'm going to ask each of you to just quickly name one or two challenges that you really do think are standing in the way of ensuring more resources flow to proximate communities. So Paula, I'll start with you.
So one thing, talking about international funding is, and you mentioned in your speech, Cheryl, is the localization, how you really help local organizations to fund local organizations to do the work. I think, but one barrier that is hard for the sector in general is really collaborating. We talk a lot about collaborating. Catalyst is a movement to promote collaboration, but it's very hard to do it. And I can see no other way to make a better use of the philanthropic capital than putting actors together and collaborating. Changes take time. Social and environmental transformation take time and persistence. We need to persist. And so collaboration is key in the long term. So trust is basic for that, but I have a lot of hope in what's coming. I see a new generation bolder, more tolerant and engaged,
And I hope that we really can change the philanthropic field to be more localized. And also, what was really interesting in participating in Catalyst was that I could see NGOs working with social businesses. I hope I see that in the future, we are not going to have frontiers between philanthropic capital and mainstream capital. And I do believe that there's a lot of polarization in that regard from both sides. And I could see that happening in Catalyst, which I think it's very important to point.
Well, and thank you. So Paula has restructured the conversation in a beautiful way, which I love. So we're going to take our direction from her, where she talked both about some of the challenges that she's seen in the space, but also some of the bright spots. And I think in the interest of time, just sort of putting that conversation together makes a lot of sense. So Nyla, I'll come to you. Some of the challenges that you see as well as bright spots.
So yeah, very much like Paula. I mean, I think the lack of collaboration is something that we also see in our sector, in our region. But you know, to make it as kind of bullet pointed as possible, because I mean, you know, once you get started talking about the challenges, it just tends to go on and on and on. And particularly when you're in a region like the region that I sit in, there tend to be quite a few challenges. But you know, I think I kind of usually break it down to three different pieces. So the first is around the environment, enabling or not, which in many cases isn't. You know, we don't really function in an environment that's very conducive to collaboration, and it tends to build many, many more restrictions as we go along. A lot of that has to do with a lack of cooperation between our sector and government sectors. In many cases, you know, I often say that we seem to have taken the N out of the NGO, and you'll see that even just in the way our philanthropic entities are structured. So in many cases, they are, you know, very much GO, and in some ways, you know, the oversight is very much from government organizations. So there really isn't a lot of independence. You know, we suffer from a lot of banking and government restrictions, banking restrictions internationally as well as locally. So, you know, difficulties in getting cross-border giving out of different countries, and even just making grants within the region can be very, very difficult. And then my big thing, which I just harp on and on and on about, is our lack of data. We don't have enough data in our region to support our sector when we are telling our story, when we are, you know, when we're trying to convey our narrative. And that also, in many cases, you know, is a hindrance in the localization aspect. And I use that word very, very carefully, because I know it has now tended to take on some controversy. I'll be very honest, I'm not 100% sure what the controversy is. I've just been told that there is controversy in calling it localization.
Interesting.
You know, I've always used it to mean the empowerment, you know, the empowerment of the sector locally and regionally to be sustainable, and funding for the infrastructure within the sector. And so that's another, you know, big challenge that we seem to have. And I mean, the example I always give is, you know, I'm an Arab organization. The restrictions in our region have gotten so severe, to the extent that I've had to register myself outside of the region to be able to function, because I was unable to function in any kind of productive way within the region. All of my banking has to happen outside of the region, and almost 100% of my funding has to come from outside of the region. So, and that sort of opens up a whole other, you know, challenge around the empowerment, right? So if I'm fundraising externally, then how can I then talk about having the local resources and developing that sort of trust in the local resources if my own region won't fund me? So, but the bright spots,
yes,
it's always good to end on the bright spots.
Indeed.
I try to remind myself of them often. So one kind of unexpected bright spot, I would say, is, for us at least, the 2 years of COVID, the kind of 2 big years of COVID, really were a very interesting moment for us, where we were able to just kind of take a look at what our network was doing, how was it serving the sector, did we need to redirect some of our benefits and some of our activities and some of our programs. And this was a moment that we took advantage of what seemingly was a global challenge, but what seemingly could have ended a lot of our work, and actually ended up being a great facilitator for us. So through that, we were able to expand our network. We were able to work a little bit on what did it mean to be a network in these times, and what was it that we were able to offer our sector, and came up with a lot more than we were doing in the past, because before that it was all, travel and try to get as many as many members on board and try. But this kind of 2-year gave us a moment just to sort of breathe and kind of look a little bit at what else could we be doing, how else could we be addressing our sector. And then conversations like this, honestly, and just being invited to be at these tables, which really is critical, because at least in my experience in the 10 years that I've been at AFF, the Arab region has been underrepresented. And I often find that to be very interesting, given that, 22 countries, 390 million, 410 million people, depending on which statistics you're looking at, about 10% of the world's geography, and the fact that we are consistently not invited to the tables for these global conversations is an interesting thing. So just being invited to these conversations and having the platform to be able to speak about our experience, I think, is a huge bright spot.
Wonderful. Great. And a really powerful conversation. Nathaniel, I'll ask you to build on either what you've heard or take us in a new direction, whatever suits your fancy.
Sure. One thing I'll just echo is the data problem. I mean, this is extremely real, and basically outside of the United States, the data is total garbage in most geographies in terms of what's going on when it comes to giving. And so it's not, we won't have the time to unpack that, but just to say absolutely. And it's a huge barrier to understanding where there are potential efficiencies and reforms, because we literally don't know what's going on. There's just no data. It's all anecdotal. So I can't agree with that, more strongly. To me, one of the other, and this might sound commonsensical, barriers to really getting a lot of donors to embrace the kinds of norms and values that we're pushing through networks like this one is the attribution problem, and the kind of obsession or desire for a lot of donors, not all, to really take credit for things. And that's often what fundamentally drives, more restrictive, short-term project cycle type of funding, is to be able to stick your logo on something and to say, hey, I did that. That was my $100,000. That was my $1 million. It's over there, and I'm going to paint my logo on it. And I say that in part because I just spent a couple of weeks at our offices in East Africa and went out to see a lot of rural areas where we do a lot of work in the education sector, and even in really off the radar places. You walk around villages and towns and there are just donor logos all over the place. And this is also a problem shared by NGOs, frankly, right? It's not entirely the donor's fault. You see a lot of NGO logos in a lot of pretty remote places as well. And so this whole issue of attribution does get in the way. The flip side of that coin, where I have seen, even if anecdotally, some bright spots and encouragement, are when donors let go of that desire to be able to absolutely claim direct causality and attribution, and are okay with contribution as something they can point towards. And there's like a cliche quote from, I think, Harry Truman, when you stop caring about who takes credit, you can really achieve big things. And that is really true in philanthropy. When you don't let attribution be a constraint, you can get into collaboration a lot more easily, and you can be really comfortable with more trust-based approaches to giving, because you are comfortable at the end of the day not knowing exactly where every dollar went in terms of a live touch, or a child educated, or a vaccine procured, but you're able to say we invested in ecosystems, in movements, and we know the sum total of that is real, and we can still point to real evidence that that's had an impact. And that shift in mentality, which is a big thing internally for a lot of donors, and frankly, particularly longer running private philanthropies, takes time, and there's a lot of battles, and you can imagine the kind of internal political economies that get in the way of that. But when you do see the shift, it's quite encouraging, and it becomes actually very easy and intuitive to understand how to do this better. It's not hard to figure out, but when you let go of attribution, that's, I think, what does unlock a lot of behavior change, at least on the donor side.
Great. Thank you, Nathaniel. And thank you. This is fabulous. When the moderator is taking lots of notes, it's a great panel, which I'm doing. So thank you, each and every one of you. Vishal, how about you next? Please build on what you've heard.
Thanks, Cheryl. Definitely a lot of what was just said by Nathaniel group resonates. I think, with India, which is, the region of our DUS focus, and especially the focus of the Rebuild India Fund, I think seeing the ecosystem sort of starting to really connect and starting to thrive, right? To feel like that. And there is more data, there is Unlike what some of my co-panelists said earlier, in the Indian context, you do have a lot of local organizations, homegrown nonprofits. But I think scale perhaps is part of the problem to localization in India, because all the challenges and issues that stare us in the face are all scaled up. And so the idea is to really accelerate and move with urgency, scale up. And I think in the process of scaling, we don't adequately embed diversity and inclusion into our funding principles, into our criteria for, for searching and seeking proximate leaders. And so I think in the Indian context, really pushing beyond that and thinking about embedding these principles in our sourcing and selection, embedding these principles in how we assess the data, and how far has actually the dollar gone, right? Into which unreached geography? How do we ensure that philanthropy is focusing and doubling down in the same regions, right? Is part of what the challenge is. And I think some of that involves as letting go and trusting, right? From the philanthropist, because in the Indian context, like a local organization that and a local supporting a local community that and India has so many languages and we have so much translation going on here, but there's so many languages that most Indians don't speak within the country, right? So how can you someone who looks different, speaks so different? So you've got to be able to let go a little, right? And sort of trust more and have that be principles of philosophy too. And if you design around, start to see that more platforms coming that are elevating that are making it these voices and these localized solutions and pathways to building resilience on the ground more accessible, right? More understandable, supporting them. And which brings me to what gives me hope is precisely that I find myself in more conversations with philanthropists that are saying on India from within the country as well as outside, where there's recognition that the current system we built is failing. Indians, millions of Indians getting left behind, even though this dramatic scale in and social impact in the Indian context. And so there's introspection around, shifting and sharing power and privilege. And I think those conversations are at a household level and at a family philanthropy level. And we're wanting to seek better, right? And so that seeking behavior has begun. And I think that gives me and us at Dasra a lot of hope.
That's fabulous. And Vishal, thank you for linking sort of the work to building more capacity and resilience on the ground. Such an important part. And Didi, bring us home, close out this fabulous panel, as I know only you can do. So go for it.
Well, I mean, it's tough to come after all these rock stars, but I would say, and it's also tough to speak for an entire continent with 54 countries. But I would say that from my lens, there are three wicked problems we're still facing. One is a lot of bias. There's tremendous bias and a single story that continues to persist, that there are no strong local organizations and that Africans cannot solve their own problems. And we are taking charge on reframing that narrative. With the support of Catalyst, we've created Africa Forward, which is really a consortium of social innovators saying enough is enough. We have to dismantle those biases and work collaboratively to change this perception and also prove through capacity building, through sharing positive stories, through holding our local philanthropists accountable, as well as international philanthropists, to track how much they're doing locally and how they're working with local organizations. And we're going to celebrate positive trends in the right direction. So that's the first thing, narrative changing. The second is actually bridging the gap between local organizations and philanthropists. So Africa Philanthropy Forum has created Start Points. It's like a guide star for African social innovators where we can vet them. They can provide a lot of the information and philanthropists can find them, so that philanthropists can stop using that excuse that they just can't find the local organizations. And our international INGOs can also partner with those local organizations to deliver impact on the ground. And so that gives me a lot of hope because we are building the infrastructure. And then the third thing is that we're starting to see, and this is where I end on a positive note, we're starting to see unusual suspects partnering. We're starting to see corporate foundations on the ground, and COVID really rallied them together because the rest of the world really ignored our continent. And so we had to take matters into our own hands. And during COVID, we actually proved that we could do it. So we had in Nigeria, for example, all the major foundations get together and start working. We had the faith-based organizations get together and start feeding people. So we brought unusual suspects together. And I think we have to continue to sustain that momentum. And Cheryl, I know you believe in opening the tents. There's no way we can solve these wicked problems if we don't work across the divide with the private sector, with faith organizations, with philanthropists, and with governments to change the status quo and collectively leverage our power and our comparative and competitive advantages to solve problems. And I'll end with my favorite quote, which is an African proverb, which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far with others, go with others. But I've reframed it to say we must go fast and far together. And to do that, building on Nathaniel's point, we must leave our egos and logos at the door. And we must work with integrity and excellence, really putting the needs of the most vulnerable ahead of our own personal agendas and really drive impact at scale. Thanks so much.
Bravo. Paula, Nyla, Nathaniel, Vishal, and Didi, just spectacular. And I presume if you all can continue to stay for the rest of the panel, our many guests will probably be chatting you furiously. So please continue to share your prodigious wisdom. But that was just fabulous. We're all grateful for you all taking the time. And next time we'll need probably another 2 hours with you all. So thank you so much. And with that, I am very excited to thank these incredible leaders and to welcome our next set of incredible leaders. Again, I will introduce them alphabetically. We have Maria Bistat, Strategy Lead, H&M Foundation, Kevin McAndrew, Director, Innovation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Nadir Shams, Director, Strategy and Learning, Skoll Foundation. Thank you all so much for joining us to close out this very important conversation. And I have no doubt that your remarks will build beautifully on what you heard from some of our ecosystem partners. But I want to start in the same place with each of you. You can't talk about the what without the why. So if we can hear from each of you about what brought you to this work and the work that you do. So Maria, let me start with you. Welcome, and please kick this off.
Thank you, Cheryl. So honored to be here. It's great. And I really agree with this previous panel. Amazing. My role as strategy lead really means that I'm responsible for setting the strategic direction for the programs around inclusive societies at the H&M Foundation. I have a background within international development. I've worked at the foundation for almost 10 years now. And why we have sort of come into the world of Catalyst is really as we see a need for donors to shift how we fund. And we really believe that we need to work in holistic collaborations, and so bring together how can we catalyze these cross-sector collaborations is really what we aim for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maria. Kevin, would love to hear from you, your why and what.
Thank you, Cheryl. So my role at the Rockefeller Foundation is in our innovation team, and we have a unique space in the organization. We operate both as a vertical and a horizontal. So we support some of our initiative teams, which follow, a more traditional approach to philanthropy around health or power and climate, different areas of our work where we have standing priorities. But we also operate as our own vertical, and this gives us a lot of latitude to experiment and get out on the edge of new issues that are just on the horizon in global development and try new ways of working that we can then seed and hope that we generate uptake within the wider Rockefeller Foundation as an organization and as a network of its own. And so within the innovation team, I have the pleasure and privilege of helping guide the way we deploy our Bellagio Center. And this is really the centerpiece of it's the physical centerpiece of a network that we've grown over decades and decades. And this includes residents, This includes conveners. This also includes grantees, where we can deploy this as an asset to drive their work forwards in a way that dollars simply can't. So working with Catalyst, working with Giroux and the whole team, supporting some of the projects that have bubbled to the surface of that network is a natural fit for us. Absolutely.
Well, personal point of privilege, I want to say thank you, Kevin, because I'm joining you from Bellagio. I just spent a week at the Bellagio Center with the Connected Women Leaders Network, and the space and opportunity you provide for people to come together and think in new ways. It's really quite extraordinary. So grateful for your leadership and support to so many who get to be in this extraordinary place. So thank you. Nadir, I'm so happy to see you. Congratulations, not only from Skoll's long-term work of being a founding member of Catalyst 2030, but also on the heels of your extraordinarily successful Skoll World Forum. I was privileged to join one of the sessions that you led, and it was just tremendous. So thank you for continuing to build up the ecosystem, and would love to hear your why and what.
Oh, of course. And I'll pass that on to my colleagues. Thank you so much for everybody that attended. It was very exciting to be back after 4 years. So I'm so happy to be here as well and share my thoughts from inside the foundation. As a director in our strategy and learning office, we also work vertically and across all of our teams and portfolios to plan and live into our mission of supporting transformational social change. So my why for this work, my work journey is driven by 3 questions. I'm a reform strategy consultant, so regrettably I'm wired to think in 3s and 5s. So forgive me, and I hope Cheryl, panelists, the audience, you'll appreciate the brevity. But those 3 questions for me are: how do we know what works? How can we scale what we know works? And how can we shift systems with what we know works? So just excited to be here because I think that really underpins so much of what we're about to discuss.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And just a reminder to everyone who's joined us, Maria and Kevin and Nadir were invited to join this conversation because in many ways, their leadership and their work really embodies the changes that social innovators have been calling for. So it's a wonderful opportunity for us to hear from them on how they're doing this very difficult work of systems change within the funding system. So let me now reverse the order and ask each of you to talk about what you're doing differently relative to the field. Nadir, let me start with you.
Yeah, so 3 things that make me proud of Skoll's approach to social innovation. I think the first is just a provocation from our journey to walk the talk is where is and who is on the front line. Since our founding in the late 90s, Skoll has always been about systems change and social innovation as a manifestation of that. It may have focused on social entrepreneurs in the 2000s and 2010s, but we saw and continue to see a lot of different types of impactful and needed doers. And we think of them as social innovators writ large. And so a fundamental aspiration of Skoll's strategy and approach that we refreshed a little over 3 years ago is: how can we support social entrepreneurs and other social innovators who are achieving transformational social change in complementary ways to shift systems? The second kind of Skoll strategy and practice that I'm proud of is just how we lean into multi-year and unrestricted funding and our flexible learning orientation. I heard it earlier from our practitioners on this chat, just that, we may not know the how, especially, where we are at Skoll and our position in the system, but we are disposed to staying out of the way unless we're invited. And that just means that we have to align earlier with our grantee partners in scoping and really aligning on those desired outcomes and the plan on possible pathways to get there. We also get to learn together with our grantee partners along the way and understand that that path may change over time. And then lastly, Skoll, there's a range of backbone services to systems change that we continuously are developing alongside our traditional funding and connecting and champion activities. So for example, we have teams looking at how do we build networks, how can we engage with government and multilaterals, and then also a funder alliances team that's really looking to engage peers like mine here on the panel. And so this is critical to accelerate that work for social innovation, not only individual organizations, but also trying to pull levers in systems change. And so, yeah, those are just 3 quick things that really came to mind on Skoll's journey.
Super helpful. Thank you. Kevin, how about you and Rockefeller?
Thank you, Cheryl. That was wonderful to hear also, Nadir. Before I jump into what we're exactly doing differently now, I think it's useful to put it into context, right? So the Rockefeller Foundation has a long track record of driving the forefront of development. So you go all the way back, helping build the field of public health, helping really catalyze the green revolution. More recently, we've made a significant bet around deployment of solar energy to end energy poverty across the global south through the Global Energy Alliance. And these are areas where we see an opportunity to really change the paradigm and shift the balance of how things work at a baseline. And within the innovation team, the network I spoke about earlier really is an important sounding board and sourcing mechanism and sensing mechanism to find where those future areas can be. So we operate under a strategic banner that we call the Connected Leaders Platform. And this, in my mind, is really a version of trust-based philanthropy. So over the decades of running convenings, bringing residents into the Bellagio Center, we've developed a really powerful toolkit of in-kind assets and resources we can deploy to support leaders. But then over time, as we stay in touch with these individuals and follow their work, it gives us the opportunity to continually find new ways to support them on their journey. We do things like deploy small grants in order to catalyze success and action stemming from these residencies, stemming from these convenings. And it's a much different approach than traditional philanthropy, where you come in from the top with a theory of change, and then you go look for partners who can execute your theory of change. What we're trying to do is bet on leaders in their vision. And we're trying to then build connections between those individuals so they can achieve more than they might be able to do on their own. And so our role then becomes a connector, it becomes a catalyst, as opposed to like the director of the whole symphony. So this new banner of the Connected Leaders Platform that we are deploying within the innovation team, we see this as our version of trust-based philanthropy as a complement to the more scientific, traditional top-down approach of private philanthropy over many years. We see this also as a way to show how in-kind support, going beyond the dollars, I think this is part of what the open NGO letter talks about, really can sometimes be the most important way to catalyze change. Right, Cheryl, you're literally at the Bellagio Center now. You're feeling the good vibe of the energy of the place. And you could probably speak to the effect of the power of being there and having the time and the space. And then the support we provide. So we help our conveners really design the experience, optimize, how they're going to spend those days at the Bellagio Center. We hold the hands of these people in our network to support their work. But we really are leader-led in doing this the whole way through. So it's all right-sized based on what they need and where they need to go. And we just look for the opportunities for who's going to make the biggest impact, and we look to support them over time.
Yeah, good. Thank you, bud. Really terrific stuff. And I like this notion of right size for the leader. Thank you for that. And hopefully the Catalyst 2030 Network can share more about the Bellagio Center, because you hear a lot about the word game changing amongst participants at that magical place. And it is really unlike any other thing that I've experienced, and it's all too rare for those of us who are in the trenches. So thank you for that. Maria, please build on what you've heard from your colleagues and share what you're thinking about it at H&M Foundation, please.
Thank you. Yeah, also to put some context to it, H&M Foundation is a small family philanthropy, and the board gives us the mandate to be innovative as a donor. So we look for gaps and opportunities where philanthropy can come in and test and seed and validate new ways of working and innovation. So we do this by co-creating initiatives to change systems and also fund innovation and research that can contribute towards a socially inclusive and planet positive fashion industry, and also beyond that. So some 4 years back, really, we took a strategic decision to move away from funding earmarked, restricted, kind of single focus projects to instead start funding holistic programs and catalyzing cross-sectoral collaborations, where a large group of actors then come together to simultaneously address the root causes of social challenges, really looking at the full picture. So where we aim to co-create the solutions together with the people who have lived experience of the problems. And practically, we use a method called collective impact, which is familiar to many of you, I'm sure. It's a highly structured way of collaborating, and where all partners work in a trust-based manner based on really equitable structures where no one member of the collective will carry more weight than the others. And key really to ensure this power balance, if you will, is to fund this neutral backbone organization that we always actually make sure that we have in our programs. And this backbone is a locally anchored organization that acts as a coordinator for the whole collective. They don't have an implementing role, but really facilitate the collaborative aspect. That's their role. And just to give an example of how that can, or what we do with collective impact programs is, in India, we initiated our first collective impact program in 2020, where we work with informal waste pickers. And here the aim is to create social inclusion along emerging circular economies to enable a just and inclusive transition where informal waste pickers will be part of co-creating and building formal supply chains of recycled materials. And this initiative unites 10 local organizations across sectors. And it's a holistic ecosystem, really, addressing what the waste picker community themselves had identified as the key root causes to their marginalization and poverty. And to have that holistic approach also means working across conventional boundaries to bust silos, really. So we very much include the private sector as well. So, for example, by supporting social entrepreneurs that may have innovative solutions to circularity. But a sort of key requisite is that they come with a holistic ambition. So their solutions bring both environmental benefits and social inclusion for the waste pickers in this case. And I can just add that all of our initiatives are also long-term, multi-year commitments.
Great. That's a terrific example. So thank you for that, Maria. And we are way over time, but I took moderator privilege because it was too important to hear from all of you. And it was such a phenomenally rich and important conversation. We're going to do a real lightning round and would love to hear from each of you about any bright spots you see, not in your own organizations where you're clearly leading and thinking very differently about the way that you fund, but what gives you hope as you look across the broader funding landscape? So let's very quickly go around. Kevin, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Cheryl. I'll pick up on a few things that were said earlier, which, these ideas of trust and collaboration and attribution versus contribution. I think there's a lot of different places where we hear these things talked about in different ways. Right, collective impact, Maria, you mentioned, is a version of this. Trust-based philanthropy is a version of this. There's a lot of different ways in which this shows up. And I think that those are the keys to the big progress that we need to make. I see a lot of the chatter around, how there are so many urgent challenges for us to face. And the only way to do it is to do it together. So these principles of trust and collaboration are so key. And we talk about them in different ways, but I see those becoming increasingly part of the mainstream approach.
Well said. Maria, how about you?
Well, I mean, we've also heard about collaboration being really difficult. It's a huge challenge. And we see this, I mean, it doesn't come necessarily naturally. There has to be an incentive from the start. And I think really the donors need to sort of be that facilitator and say, we need to collaborate. We could see this in India. In the first year, collaboration only happened on a very basic level, some activities here and there. But today, some 3 years later, the collaboration has deepened profoundly, and it now happens on so many levels, such as the partner organizations sharing resources and facilities and knowledge and mobilization efforts. And that, I think, is really encouraging. And we believe that we can start seeing some movement towards deep collaboration.
Well said. And last but not least, Nadir, finish it out for us.
Yeah, of course, I might just pull up for a second and just say, looking at values, nurturing humility in our organizations and to practice it by listening to our portfolio partners on the front line gives me hope. And, you know, the funder power dynamics are real. So, you know, that active listening is so important. And it's okay to be servant leaders. At school, we saw and continue to live into our progress because of affirmation of values like humility. And I see it in so many of us here this week. And that just personally gives me so much hope because it manifests in so many different ways. So thank you.
Thank you for reminding of us all of that, Nadir. And thank you to each of you, Maria, Kevin, Nadir, for such a rich conversation as well. And Drew, I know I'm in trouble with you because I run way over, but again, such a phenomenal conversation. We needed every moment of it. And I know our wonderful Catalyst 2030 colleagues will still get their member announcements in. So over to you, Drew.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Thank you to all the panelists. You all have been fantastic. And Cheryl, no, you were bang on time. No worries at all. I take this opportunity to basically close us. But before I do, I have Rodrigo, who has to make a wonderful announcement. So Rodrigo, over to you for a minute to talk about what you are going to do so Catalyzing Change continues.
Hi, everyone. So very happy to be here with all of you in this amazing Catalyze Change Week. And what I would like to announce is the Catalyze Change Week will continues. Last year, we created a big event in Rio de Janeiro as a kind of Rio Plus 30, where we promote sustainability and initiatives to accelerate the SDGs in the Rio de Janeiro state. And we mobilize over 30,000 people, 250 hours of content, 530 articles in the newspapers and televisions. And then we mobilize 40 leaders in Rio to produce 4 scenarios for Rio de Janeiro in 2030. And we select 5 SDGs that will leverage Rio de Janeiro. And this year, we're gonna do again. And we're gonna organize the GLOCO. The name of this event is GLOCO, Thinking Global and Act Local. So GLOCO Amazon on August, and then GLOCO Rio de Janeiro on October. And we're gonna continue talking about the social innovation economy and in the context of G20, and this will be really amazing. So GLOCO Amazon and GLOCO Rio in August and October, we'll continue this discussion about social innovation economy in the Catalyze Change Week. And it will be amazing collaborate with all of you in these 2 big events in Brazil. I'm here in the Amazon forest, giving a big huggy and energy from the forest, Amazon forest for all of you in this moment that we have an amazing success in the Catalyze Change Week. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And over here, as I say, it's to be continued. I'd first like to thank Cheryl for a fantastic closing panel. Really, really nice with all the energy that you had. To all our fantastic panelists, to our donors who've been part of it, to our ecosystem partners. We are walking the talk. We are making change happen. And I hope, as you said, we'll have more trust-based philanthropy, more collaborations. Maria, you'd be happy to know, without funding, we have 120 collaborations. And what I heard, we've had multiple collaborations sparked this week in Catalyzing Change Week. So the change is happening, and we are hoping that the change can continue and get accelerated. And like Rodrigo said, we're not just changing the sector, the donors, but we also want to change G20. We want to impact the UN. Let's not forget we had the historic resolution where social economy was taken up by the UN. And today I had a session on taxation, and we have so many things which are happening. The change is happening. It's because of all of you. And as every one of us walks the talk, I want to once again thank everyone who participated in Catalyzing Change Week, our phenomenal 2,000 plus members, the participants, our translators who have been there from Translators Without Borders. And last but not the least, I am blessed to have a fantastic governing council and a fantastic team. So I would like to give a shout out to them because they are the core who make all of this happen. Thank you all very, very, very much. And as everyone signs off, please, please, please write your one emotion as Catalyzing Week closes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. It's fantastic. Thank you. And bang on time, as always. So, yay. Don't forget to write your emotions as you go and as we close the week. Lots of love, lots of hope, and more important, continuing as we go. Thank you. Bye.